heavily involved in everything to do with D&I within the team at Beam. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I'll stop there, and I'm sure we'll come on to plenty of other things later on in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Yasmina. And so yeah, I kind of knew Yasmina through Clifford Chance and some of the work that we're doing there, and hopefully throughout the day, throughout the next sort of half an hour, we'll find out a little bit more about that and some of the fantastic work that's now taking place with Beam as well. So really appreciate you joining us, Yasmina. And then Alex, how are you?
Right, hi. So I'm Alex Bellins, and I'm a trans guy. So I don't really have a fancy title. I'm 19. I'm a uni student, and my experience is in like teaching assistant work, mentoring, tutoring, so working with young people, stuff like that, and that's the kind of stuff I really enjoy. So I just thought I'd get some definitions out there. Now, obviously, it's a safe space. You're going to get stuff wrong, and I always get stuff wrong, and that's fine. But like, let's try and know what we're talking about. So I'm a transgender man, which means that my sex, which is female, is different to my gender identity, which is male. And I go through a process of transition, which means that I move from living as female to living as male. So I've always been male. The transition doesn't actually change my gender. Transgender is a stupid name because my gender's never really changed. I've always been a guy, but I've just moved into living as that. So transition can be social, so that's changing appearance. So that's like hair, clothes, pronouns, name, stuff like that. And then it can be medical. I've been on hormone blockers, cross-sex hormones, so testosterone, and I'm waiting to get surgery. So not all trans people will go through that process, and there is no the surgery that makes you transgender. So when people ask, have you had the surgery, please don't ask about genitals over lunch. It's a bit weird. So yeah, there's no one thing that makes you trans. There's no the surgery. It's just who I am, and I just kind of went from living as female to living as male in order to be happier, basically. And yeah, I get asked a lot, like, why did you choose to transition? I think choose is the wrong term there. So the incongruence between my gender identity male and my sex assigned at birth female means that there's a lot of distress, and that's called gender dysphoria. And that kind of really intense uncomfortableness is why I needed to transition in order to be able to function. And ultimately, my goal as a transgender person is just to live. I'm not looking for like a pride every day. I just want to be able to function. I want to be at the point where being trans doesn't matter in my day-to-day life. And thankfully, in the spaces that I've worked at, they've actually been very accepting. So they've been like, oh, you're trans, okay, fine. And then just move on. There's not been any big thing made of it, which I appreciate. So my journey, I came out very young to my family at 12, and to my wider community at 13. And so I was within like a small Jewish community, and I was the first trans person to come out. And surprisingly, the young people were actually okay with it. So I kind of had to justify myself quite a bit. But after a few months, people got used to it. But the problem was with the senior members of staff at my school, and it meant that they wouldn't let me use the boys' toilets or changing rooms because they just clearly didn't see me as boy. And so I left, and I just learned to choose my battles. I can't make the world perfect. I just need to pick where I fight. And hopefully this is a helpful battle. So I moved to a comprehensive school, excelled there, and then here I am at Durham studying maths and philosophy. Very happy. Yeah, my other thing is I am asexual, and I'm not really out much in that because I kind of still feel a bit of stigma around it. I still feel broken, which is weird to say as like an LGBT advocate, but I still feel a little bit of internal resistance. So I've kind of only come out to very, very close family. I've never really felt like I needed to. Yeah, so that's it. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Really great to hear your introduction and your story so far, and you know, maths and philosophy at Durham. Got a lot of work on at the moment.
Yeah, it's an awkward one. Essay deadlines and then endless lectures. It's weird. It's the worst of both worlds, but I think I enjoy it.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you. So thanks both for the introduction. And I want to go back to a couple of things you started to allude to a little bit, Yasmina, about maybe some of the barriers that you may have faced in any of your your working career, or if you had any personal barriers as well. And if you feel comfortable about maybe talking through some of those.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of the barriers that I was anxious about facing were all to do with biphobia. So the key one being, and particularly in the workplace, that hypersexualization, particularly of bi women. And I remember the first time that I talked to one of my best friends about my fear of coming out at work. I said, I don't know if it would be appropriate. And she was like, well, what does that mean? And I was like, oh, well, when you're a woman and you say you're bi, people immediately jump to conclusions about promiscuity. And she was like, well, firstly, that's called biphobia, so people shouldn't do that. But if people need to unlearn that, that's really their problem to deal with. And I think a lot of the education and the conversations that are happening now are really helpful in encouraging people to be very open in their understanding of what relationships are and what attraction means. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to jump on every person who walks past. And so for me, that was one thing I was quite anxious about when it came to coming out. The other thing I was anxious about, which again relates to biphobia, is having to justify my bi-ness. And this even is something that you can feel within the LGBT community, is quantifying how LGBT you are. Does it mean that you have to have had a relationship with a woman? In my case, does it mean that you have to have just fancied someone? At what stage are you bi enough to come out and talk about being bi? And so I was sort of thinking, oh, well, is it dependent on who I'm dating at the time? And then the final thing was around assumptions. So when I said, oh, I went on a great date, and if people would say, oh, right, who was he? Then I would immediately feel that blocker to be like, oh, I guess I'll just go along with it, rather than correct and cause any friction or awkwardness. And I would say the more comfortable that I have become in owning who I am and knowing how to do it in a workplace, I've been able to correct things. I've been able to ask people to use less gendered language and say, oh, actually, you could just say they, who were they, and allow me to invite who it was I was on a date with. And so those were some of the barriers that I was anxious about, some of the barriers which I have faced in small part. But actually, the most of the barriers I faced were internal, and it was this anxiety about how I would be perceived. And when I did come out in the workplace, it wasn't any fanfare, which was fantastic. I mean, Alex, you said, when people just acknowledge who you are and move on, that's actually sometimes the best reception you can get. So I've definitely found that, the majority of the barriers have been internal, and the environment that's created can make you feel as comfortable as possible to come out, and then know how to talk to your colleagues when it comes to making small corrections about, how they pose what is seemingly an innocent question. So yeah, those would be the things I'd say.
Yeah, I can kind of relate to some of those. I mean, a lot of my I suppose barriers as well were those that I'd created myself, or I'd kind of built up into something that maybe should never have really been there. And but there was things within the workplace as well. I mean, I looked around and there was no role models within our business at senior level from a LGBTQ plus background. We had no network that I could join or be involved in. So, and I'd gone through probably 12, 13 years of this, okay, Friday afternoon, really thinking and making up, what am I going to be doing at the weekend? Which auntie am I seeing this weekend? Who's going to be posting what on, making sure all my security settings were as high as possible so no one could post photos of me if I was out in London. And then again on the Monday, just really thinking, okay, who did I say I was with? Blah, blah, blah. So it was that 12 or 13 years of doing that. And then it really turned into, okay, I am ready to start telling people, but now they're all going to question my, I suppose, honesty and how authentic I was, because I've lived this life for 12, 13 years, and then I'd built it up into my head that that's all that anybody was going to see or remember at the end of it. But I've just been really, really fortunate and really lucky. I think, like Yasmina, I've had, and I didn't realize this at the time, but I suppose a best friend at work, and Lee, my colleague, who's our HR director, is probably my best friend at work, and I really felt that she was there for me. She's helped me through all of this and has been a great ally throughout. And one of the things that I've really tried to do and ensure is that at all levels across our business, we've got visibility, we've got role models. Role models don't just have to be someone who's really senior in the business. It can be at any level within any business or at university. Or Alex is a role model to many people, and it's just really ensuring that people feel comfortable being a role model and understanding it, and trying to ensure that people don't feel like me when they're in a business 12, 13 years down the line, and that there's, they feel that they can be themselves and they don't have to go back into the closet when they leave university and join a business. So yeah, I think a lot of them were barriers, but we've really tried to, I've tried to break down some of them, Yasmina, especially, within our business today. And it's just very different to what it was 20 years ago, which I'm so grateful for. Alex, I'm gonna come to you about this question, because I did read your story in Teen Vogue, which it was a great interview. I personally learned a lot, and so I know you've had obstacles, and you were very eloquently spoke about them as well. Do you want to share some of those thoughts with us for people on the call, and maybe some of those obstacles you've faced?
Thanks, Ashley. I mean, I thought that that interview, I didn't realize that the interviewer was just going to transcribe the whole thing. And I thought when I read it back, I was like, that makes no sense. But at least you got something out of it.
Yeah.
So I agree with you guys that, yeah, it's definitely, the barriers are quite internal, and you feel like you have to justify yourself, especially coming out as like the first trans person. There's no one else out there. So, like, especially when I was coming out, when I was young, you kind of constantly get, well, you're not young enough and you're not old enough. How do you know? Is always asked. Like people try to excuse it. Oh, have you been abused or something? Maybe there's a chemical imbalance that was. People think that you have to go through this medical process in order to realize. And that was what eventually convinced like my family and friends that like this was a real thing, after I went through like a very rigorous Tavistock process. And just like transition wise, there's so many hoops to jump through. So this idea that you just come out and then get injected with testosterone is just the furthest from the truth. It took me 5 years of therapy to get onto testosterone, which is the only permanent part of my transition. So that barrier, there's just internal feeling like you constantly have to justify yourself, and also sometimes again about being in stealth, and you don't really feel like coming out, and you just have to like constantly keep tabs on like what you've said and and when people just, I'm lucky enough that I pass, so people will just assume that I'm cisgender, not transgender, so I've just got to be like, oh wait, I can't say that because I'm in stealth. And even like a school that I was thinking about going to, they wanted to make me stay in stealth because they were afraid of the reaction they would have with the community. So that implies just how normal it is to feel like you have to be in stealth. Now, kind of more practically speaking, toilets are quite a big issue. So just things like having stalls and sanitary products for some trans men is obviously really, really helpful. And gendered uniform is tricky because before you're out, obviously, if you're having to wear a skirt every day, that's really, really difficult. So please allow people to wear the appropriate uniform, and also for non-binary people, try to reduce like gender distinctions, gendered spaces, and please have non-binary toilets, not just like one in the whole campus, but like one per block, so we don't have to hike just to get to the toilet. And then application forms, like when they ask for ID, that always strikes fear into me because my birth certificate still says female on it. So the only way to change your birth certificate is to get a gender recognition certificate. So please don't assume that all trans people have that. They're really quite rare, and I don't have one. And it's quite a horrible process to have to go through to get the gender recognition certificate. And even like there's a gym that they say the only way trans people can use the correct changing rooms is by providing evidence through a gender recognition certificate. So yeah, things like providing pronoun boxes and just constantly and talking about pronouns, having pronouns on IDs and in emails is really helpful. It really helps those that are in the process of coming out, and it just makes you feel like you have a space to come out, because when you're like trying to come out, you just don't know how to or where to. But then if you just switch pronouns, then people catch on. It's just that easy. And then also on the asexual front, having, you know how you have the sexual identity boxes, gay, straight, bi, other. I don't like other. It makes you feel like you're outside, and that's obviously a big part of being LGBT. You always feel like you're on the outside. So asexual spectrum is a way of being more inclusive there. And just having those spaces where people can feel like they're part of a group is just so helpful. And I've had them in uni, and they kind of make little families, like pre-made LGBT families for you, and it's just so nice. And there's been a lot of medical stuff that I needed to go through. So in terms of the workplace, it's just allowing for time off. That's about all you can do, really. Yeah. So I think that's it for my various things.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate that. And you kind of touched on as well, which was really interesting. Some of, going into the theme too, which was really looking about how do we create that safe and inclusive in work environment. And Yasmina, is there anything that some of the things that you've seen either yourself or through within your current role working with other employers as well that that employers have done to or can do to create that safe, inclusive workplace?
Yeah, definitely. And just to echo everything that Alex has just said, the importance of application forms and things like assessment days really can't be underestimated. I think one of the most powerful things I've actually seen an organization do, and it was my former boss, who's also a good friend of Ash, fantastic woman called Laura Yates, is make sure that all of our suppliers, so everyone that we were working with as a team, made sure that all of their application forms, all of their websites were audited, and she encourages them all to make sure that they're using inclusive language, because anyone that we affiliate ourselves with has to represent our values and our brand. And I think so for employers to use their remit, and anyone who's listening in, always trying to have an impact not only on your organization but everyone else in your sphere is really important, and it's such a good way to advocate and be a fantastic ally. So application forms and assessment days incredibly important. So always asking for pronouns and preferred names. Small things like if you have badges, always having Yasmina, she, her on a badge. Evidently, talking to building stuff. And again, this comes back to the point around suppliers. You almost have to do a walkthrough. If I'm inviting people into the building, say for an open day, who are they going to pass en route? If I'm running an LGBT specific event, I need to remind my door staff not to say, hello, sir, madam, where are you going? Or, using gendered language at every point, because that does tend to happen more often than you'd like. And it means people are consistently misgendered and will walk into a space and already feel insecure. And making sure that your values are lived out throughout every aspect of a candidate's journey. Then internal networks and events. I think marking all key days of importance throughout the LGBT calendar is so important. not just honing in on Pride and only doing something in June and then, you know, forgetting that LGBT people exist for the rest of the year. Actually, there are so many really important days throughout the calendar year, like Trans Day of Remembrance, National Coming Out Day, which is in October, Bi Awareness Day, and where possible, always considering intersectionality and drawing things together. So an example of one thing I've done this month is email all of the employers that work with Beam and recruit our beneficiaries to draw the link between Black History Month and World Homelessness Day and National Coming Out Day, all of which fall in October. Incredibly busy month. But again, talking to our employers about the fact, you know, this is really important to understand. You have to take into account the increased vulnerability and levels of homelessness within certain communities, so in this case Black communities and LGBT communities, and think about how, you know, hiring or supporting people from those communities will help to make the world a more equitable place. So always trying to take into account that intersectionality where you can, and there are some pretty easy ways you can do it. It's emails like that, or for example, when I did run our Pride event, I didn't make a big deal out of it, but the speakers I chose, I did a poetry event, which is educational but fun and enjoyable for everyone to come along to. One of the poets was a trans man, another of the poets was a bi woman, and they were both Black. And I didn't say like, oh, I'm making a point about intersectionality. I was like, these are some queer people that I'm choosing to profile. So from, you know, considering the type of events that you run, the type of speakers that you choose to profile, you can include intersectionality in every single thing that you do. And then the final thing I'd say that I think is incredibly important, and I've slightly touched on already, is, you know, celebrating each of the identities that fall within the LGBTQ plus bracket, because you don't just want focus on any one of those. You really want to be acknowledging the spectrum of identities that fall within to the bracket and make everyone feel seen and safe and heard. And I think, you know, a really easy way to do that is to have a calendar. Use Stonewall's LGBT calendar and figure out what days you're going to mark, how and why, and use a multimedia and multi-layered approach to do it. Sometimes maybe it's an event, sometimes it's an article, maybe it's just you know, a profile from someone in your business talking about why this particular day is important to them. I think it was literally like 2 or 3 days ago was a day for intersex people and for acknowledging intersex people. You know, there are always things that you can be acknowledging, and inviting people from within your networks and your communities to do that is really, really important.
I think you covered everything, Yasmina. You know, that's a pretty comprehensive, you know, some of the work that you've been doing and continue to do. It's, you know, I think what, as I said before, where Yasmina used to work, we're really leading the way in a lot of what employers were trying to do around LGBTQ plus inclusion. And it is, as Yasmina was saying, it's just getting some of the small things right and making sure that, you know, just on your application form, that you're using the right language, that a person doesn't come into the assessment day and just feel, oh, I don't fit in here, I don't feel included, and just making everything as easy as possible for someone to walk in and feel that, yes, I can be me here. So little things like, you know, just those little things. And Alex, is there anything you know, I know you're at Durham, have you been able to get involved in any different societies or build a network up on campus?
Yeah, so Durham's got great LGBT societies, both from like a college and a university level. So university one is a great way to meet like people across colleges as well. And they did this 5 random freshers thing where you just put in your interests aside from the LGBT thing, and then they'll just meet you up. And you've got like a pre-made friendship group, and that really gives you a sense of like being within a group. And like, it doesn't matter what the group is. Like, I really like the fact that I'm part of a college and it's got nothing to do with LGBT stuff. It just makes you feel like an insider. And this is what all of this is about. All of these like admin things to do with ticking boxes on application forms. I'm just not wanting to tick other. Like, it's all about being part of that in-group.
And I think,
also,
sorry, Alec, carry on.
So obviously Durham's got this reputation of being like posh and elitist, and I think the great way that they reached out was just to say that like normal people study here. Like, I'm not a rich genius, but like I'm here, and they obviously have got grants and scholarships which are helpful, and then programs where they go into local schools. So I'm applying to be like a future me mentor, and just to help people realize that like Russell Group universities are doable, and the people that go there are just normal people that are just quite nerdy. Yeah. And
I
then
think there's lots of
obviously
different ways, Alex, as well, that we've kind of looked at as a business. And this year, for the first time, they did an award called the Queer Student Awards, or last year, sorry, and it was really great to hear and be part of as a sponsor, as well as being able to judge. We've been able to build great relationships with different societies now on campus, who now feel that we're going to invite them to join our enterprise network and talk to some of our employees about what it's like to be LGBTQ plus university, and some of the challenges that they faced as students. And there's things that have happened, especially during the last 18 months, that you probably don't even think about or appreciate sometimes. That there's maybe many students that were really excited to go to university. This was going to be their opportunity to be themselves and start networking and meet other people, or maybe join societies on their campus. And for whatever reason, the universities were not open. Students had to study at home, and that brought a whole different set of pressures to students that maybe they just weren't expecting. And we still have a lot of work to do as employers to really try and help that students, and they've lost out on employability skills and a whole host of different things. So by getting involved in different events and awards that are taking place on campus, I think is really important for us as a business as well. And just hearing some of the stories, what the students had done to really try and engage their LGBTQ plus community virtually, and building that network, and the work that they were still continuing to do to partner with the university around simple things like light toilets, and hearing that student voice is great. So I'd really recommend you just taking a look at those awards. There's loads of great stuff on social media, and you can hear some really good stories as well. You're going to get involved this year, Alex, in it?
Go on, I'll try.
Okay, I might even not. I'm going to have to nominate you.
All right, I appreciate that.
Cool. We've kind of moved slightly into some of the attraction piece and retaining our employees, but at Enterprise we've got a lot of different things that we do. We have our Enterprise network, which, as I say, I love getting involved in. We support National Student Pride, which is again a great national event for students that takes place in London. But we also want to make sure that as a business, we're not just being, and I think it started out, you spoke about it a bit at the beginning, Ebony, it's like that it's not just that London centric, and we're not just doing London Pride or Brighton Pride. So we've still been able to do virtually, but in person back in 2019 or the last decade when we could do it, we were doing Pride events in Kings Lynn, in Cumbria, in different places across the UK that maybe not a lot of other employers were doing, and really allowing our employees from across the country to get involved in Pride events that were very local to them, and they didn't have to perhaps come down to London to get involved in different activities as well. So that was one thing that we're especially proud of, and we think it's really important from an engagement and retention of our employees. We have continued to really work on ensuring that we've got role models in our business. using our enterprise network as that to find our role models, but also using our network to really try and help look at, address, change some of our HR policies, and really taking our thoughts and what we're seeing as a network to senior managers, and being able to talk about adoption policies, for example, and ensuring that is for everybody. So we've been able to do a lot of different things to continue to attract, engage, and support our employees. And I know we've touched on it, Yasmin. Is there anything else that you've kind of seen as well from working in your at CC Clifford Chance that you've been able to do?
Yeah, definitely. And I think just in terms of attraction, what I'd love to touch on there as well is it really matters not just about your brand as a graduate recruiter, for example, but just as a whole firm. Clifford Chance really demonstrated its support for the LGBT community in so many ways. One incredibly visible way was through its pro bono work. So Clifford Chance litigation team were working on the ex-passport case, and that is essentially a case that's being brought to court to allow X to be a marker on a passport rather than just M or F, male or female. And that is one example of putting your money where your mouth is. At a law firm, people's time is literally money. That's how lawyers bill. And so really demonstrating as a firm what they were doing. They also have an incredible employee resource network who run tons of amazing events and do things not just at a educational in a lunch and learn sense, but also incredibly fun. Not saying this isn't fun, but like a Pride art show, which they do every single year, demonstrating their support for LGBTQ artists and really profiling their work and using Clifford Chance's position to elevate these artists and give them exposure to a new audience. And then there's the way that the graduate recruitment team worked. I've touched on a couple of things we did already, but really collaborating with ARCUS, which was the LGBT network, ensuring that we were sponsoring events like the first ever Bi Pride, which had a lot of students coming through it, hosting and coordinating Trans in the City events. And then there were two things that really stood out. Ash, you've talked about awards, and Clifford Chance have been the sponsor of the LGBTQ+ Undergraduate of the Year award. And that has been an incredible way to reach hundreds of thousands of students and ensure that it's clear that we are an ally as an organisation and that we want to champion young LGBTQ talent. And so that was a fantastic way for the firm to focus on attraction, but also create a pipeline of incredible candidates into the business. And on that note, there's also the Access Conference, which is coming up. Accept Conference, which is coming up. And that is all about creating acceptance and demonstrating to young LGBTQ people who want to start a career at Clifford Chance how they go about doing that. And there's lots of talks of interest. They hone in on intersectionality, again, talking about being LGBT and having a disability, for example, having being bi, identifying as bi, and really focusing in on some of the specific issues you may face, and empowering people, building connections, showing them role models both within and outside of the business, and helping people to navigate their careers as a young queer person. And a really key part of that is that there are also sessions on boosting your application and how you put everything that you have learned from that day into your application. Again, creating a pipeline into your recruitment processes. So this isn't just about the bells and the whistles and showing outwardly that you're an ally, but actually creating really meaningful pipelines into your business so that you actually hire young queer talent. And I think that's the most important thing about all of this is, not just demonstrating, but putting your money where your mouth is in lots of different ways.
Perfect. Thank you, Yasmina. Some great takeaways there, I think, for everybody. And then Alex, so the bad news is I don't know what you're going to be looking for in a career, but it's going to start getting to a point where you might have to start looking for internship placements and jobs at the end of university. What are you looking for from an employer when when searching for a job. What are we going to have to do as employers to recruit you?
I agree with Yasmina that it's not just about like bells and whistles and being like woo pride and having pride every day. It's just those like little meaningful things that mean that you feel like an insider. So all those application things, having pronouns everywhere, name badges, emails, introductions, having like a sexual spectrum as an option instead of other, creating groups of LGBT people, making LGBT people more what's the word? Like obvious, like saying that this person's LGBT and that's fine. Just kind of normalizing it, really.
Yeah.
And saying that this person in this career, yeah, they're really successful, but they're like a normal person. Just making everything feel so much more accessible. But at the end of the day, like that's only a small part of what would attract me. Like I'm a trans guy, but I'm also a huge maths nerd, so I need something exciting. So those little inclusion things, yes, but also remember we're like humans and we have like multiple elements. So yeah, let's make it exciting academically as well.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so appreciate that, Alex. So we are just coming up to the end of the session today, and there isn't really any questions in the chat, but I didn't know if anybody had any questions that they wanted to ask Alex or Yasmina or myself that we perhaps haven't covered today. No, that
I'll
might
take
mean
that as a fantastic sign that we've done our jobs here.
Yeah. And Vicky, I appreciate your comments that you've been making as well throughout. And then Yasmin has put a couple of nice resources on there as well. David, you have a question.
I do, thank you. One of the things we haven't talked about directly, so I'm trying to work out how to take my hand down. We haven't spoken about directly is how to demonstrate to skeptical execs what is the commercial benefit in terms of pounds and pounds of doing more in this space. I used to co-chair HSBC's Pride Network, but a long time ago. And we started doing client lunches with some of their private bank high net worth clients to try and understand their needs and were they satisfied with the service that they were getting and things like that, which was a toe in the water in that space. But in your more recent experience, how have you been able to demonstrate that actually, you can use improved inclusion and improved diversity to actually drive income and ultimately profit for the business?
Yasmina, you're nodding. Have you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I do actually. So I think the way I frame conversations like this is always a bit context dependent, but at the moment, and the context I will place this within, we are actually in the midst of what's called the Great Resignation by Forbes. So 53% of people, as a result of the pandemic and everyone's, reflections, have started to think about moving careers. And that is expensive for businesses to lose talent. The other thing is that 86% of people who are millennials are incredibly focused on working for socially responsible employers, and that covers D&I. So there is literally a business imperative to be a diverse and inclusive employer and to do it well. One, to retain your staff and make sure that you are not caught in the Great Resignation and lose loads of your staff because they go to places that are more evident with their social responsibility. And two, to attract new talent. And I think it's so important, particularly with the younger generations. If you've got some organisations who are incredibly open about their allyship towards queer people, more and more youth are identifying and being open about the fact that they're LGBT, then you will just not have those people applying to you, quite frankly. So those are two quite big things for me. One, retaining your team, ensuring employee engagement. Two, attracting new people.
Ebony.
Sorry, just I wanted to add a little bit onto that, Yasmina, because A, everything you said is exactly right. But B, just in terms of kind of like young people and buying from other people, buying from the right businesses. If you'll remember things like, for example, Zara a couple of years ago went through a massive scandal because of how they were producing their clothes. And do you know what? I can honestly say I've not been in Zara. since then, boycott. And that's my reaction. Now, I know, especially when working and recruiting quite a tight-knit sector, risk and compliance and legal, people talk. And excuse me, it's quite surprising actually that when someone has a good experience, yeah, they'll tell their family perhaps, or they'll tell people close to them. When someone has a bad experience, they will tell everyone that they think needs to know about that bad experience. So if they have a bad application process, or they don't get feedback, or they find that a business isn't doing things in the right way, they are more likely to tell everyone in their network, this isn't a business you should apply to. Or when someone asks them, should I go there? What do you think? They're more likely to say, actually, no, they're not very inclusive. And it's the opinions. If you think about who you get your opinions from, if you think about who do you go to for advice, well, it's the friends and your network that tell you things and you trust them. So it's really imperative for businesses, if they want to encourage that positive discussion and they want to be that brand that invites people in and actually gets people in the door, they don't ignore these things.
Thank you,
No,
Ebony.
thank you, Yasmina. I just wanted to add that.
Helen, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as someone who has worked a lot in-house and commissioned external legal services, it was kind of partly public sector, but we were very hot to see the evidence, genuine evidence of the sort that Yasmin has talked about. And I think that's getting even more so. So that's another business reason to do all this.
Yeah, totally agree as well. Vicky?
Yeah, I just thought that I'll just add on to what Yasmina and Ebony was saying. From a pure business sense, it just really makes sense to have the overall inclusion of the LGBTQIA community there, because that's the thing, that if people see themselves through the business or the university branding, then they're going to be more inclined to actually engage with that business or with that institution. Because I myself have been a student leader now at my university for 4 years, both within the queer space as well as alongside those with disability. And I'm also working for government in my state here in Australia. So for me personally, from a business perspective, we tend to see that those businesses that include all kinds of people. So when you're looking at things like orientation days and things like that for the university, you don't just write the letters like Dear Mom and Dad. It would be like Dear Caregiver, or we even did one for a kindergarten, like Dear Grown-ups, just to make it really simple. And it doesn't have to be hard, but at the same time, that even in, like I was saying earlier, if you make your resources inclusive as well, so you're not just seeing mom and dad or even same-sex couples, but you also mix it in so it's like grandma, grandpa, uncles, aunts, things like that, and just have that overall inclusion there as well. It's not tokenistic, and it makes it really easy. And at the same time, if everybody's seeing different perspectives of what they see as family and things like that as well, it makes it so much easier in terms of being able to bring those communities in also.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Cool, some really good stuff there. Now we are at time, but I know there's a couple of questions that are in the chat, and I'm hoping Ebony will be able to take note of them, and then perhaps between the three of us we can get back, or we're happy to do some posts on LinkedIn to really try and help answer some of those questions. So I appreciate the questions and appreciate everyone contributing on the call. I just want to say thank you so much. Before I hand back to Ebony, to Yasmina and to Alex, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you, to hear more about you, and I think you've really added some great insight into the session today. And I'm looking forward to seeing your nomination at the Queer Student Award, Alex, this year, 2022. But thank you so much, everybody. today's a particularly tough day for Ebony, and I want to dedicate this session that we've done today to Ebony's friend, and just wish her all the best getting over the next few days. So back to you, Ebony, just to very quickly close out the session.
Thank you so much for that, actually. It really means a lot. Yeah, I would like to dedicate the entire session to my friend Anwar Stevenson. But yeah, no, thank you firstly to my amazing panel. You've been absolutely incredible. Each and every one of you, like, we've had conversations separately, we've had conversations together, and every single time I have felt more and more inspired and more empowered to go away and to actually try and do something, do a little part, you know. So if one of you has walked away with an idea today, or a different perspective, or you've learned something new, or you've just even had a thought like, oh, I've never considered it in that way, then I feel like, you know, we've hit a success point. So thank you all for attending. Suzanne and Rachel, your questions on the chat, thank you again for putting those in there. I have made note of them. I will field them to all 3 panel members, try and get an answer from each and every one of them, and then kind of come back to you on that, if that's okay. I'm sorry we didn't have time to cover it on the actual session, but I will get those answers for you in the next couple of days. We'll also get something to you as a kind of takeaway and with a summarized view, and I will be, if it's okay with everyone, posting a recording of this session onto my D.I.G group. So if you are a member, you'll be able to see it. If you're not a member, then it's time to join, and then you'll be able to see it. But yeah, no, thank you again for attending. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye.